Forget the diplomatic tensions, that's yesterday's story. Tonight, it's all about business. $50 billion worth, in fact, the biggest resources deal in Australia's history. China and Australia have put their political differences aside, announcing overnight that the Chinese will buy $50 billion of Australian gas pumped from the Northwest Shelf. We'll get the reaction from Beijing in a moment. But first, the Australian perspective on the deal of the century.
When the Chinese open the chequebook, they buy in bulk. And in Martin Ferguson, they've found a willing partner. China's thirst for Australian gas has spawned a contract without precedent and given the government something to trumpet.
Australia's largest ever export deal.
It's a boon for the Gorgon gas project in the west. From Barrow Island, more than 2 million tonnes a year of liquefied natural gas will be shipped to China. $50 billion worth over 2 decades.
This is the biggest project in Australia by a long, long way. In fact, one of the biggest projects been undertaken in the world.
ExxonMobil is the seller, and it comes just a week after a similar $25 billion deal with India. Construction will create 6,000 jobs, with 3,500 more to follow permanently, adding fuel to the economic recovery and $6 billion to government coffers.
More investment, more jobs and more profits to Australian industry, Mr Speaker.
And more numbers to taunt the opposition.
6,000 jobs. Do you want to hear about this?
The Liberal opposition hates good news. It hates good news about the employment of Australian workers.
It was too rich for West Australian Liberals.
I am sick of hearing this government pontificate.
Barry Hass was kicked out. Others plotted a boycott in sympathy. For the government, the gas deal papers over the cracks appearing in the relationship with China. Diplomatic differences over human rights persist, but Labor will use this agreement to argue that in the world of business, nothing changes.
Tensions will remain, but it's a sign that both countries are prepared to move to a much more pragmatic and practical, but not necessarily warm or special relationship.
On Barrow Island, signs of activity could appear as soon as the end of the year, once environmental hurdles are cleared.
At that stage, it will be all go ahead for Gorgon.
All go for a gas-fired recovery. Hayden Cooper, ABC News, Canberra.
The ABC's China correspondent Stephen McDonald joins me now from Beijing. Stephen, 1 minute China's angry with Australia, the next minute they've signed this massive deal. How do the Chinese explain that?
Well, I'd have to say there hasn't been very much analysis mentioned here. We came into the ABC Bureau this morning to check the newspapers, radio and television, as we would, to see how this was treated, only to find that the story was barely mentioned. Now, those that did report it carried stories from the international media, and there'd be a fair few Chinese journalists scratching their heads today and wondering why they weren't told about a $50 billion deal with Australia. I can only assume that it's because the Chinese government, while it's happy to do commercial deals with Australia, isn't happy to send the message out to its own people that all is well with the China-Australia relationship, given the recent visit of Rabia Kadir and also the fight, I suppose, over the arrest of Stern Hu.
China seems to have come through the financial crisis in a pretty strong position, obviously, to be doing this sort of deal. Is that good news for Australian companies generally?
Well, if there's one thing this is, it's a massive vote of confidence from China in the next 20 years of economic growth here. Now, China's statistics chief talks about patchy growth here, but you'd have to think that this is an indication that Australian companies could be in for a few more windfalls down the track.
Stephen McDonald in Beijing. Thank you.